Welcome to Freedom of Expression Studio here at the Gothenburg Book Fair. This is a collaboration between Freemuse and ICORN. And in this session, we speak with political cartoonist Khalid Albaih and with Freemuse Programme Coordinator for Global Monitoring, Jasmina Lazović, on the issue of a very worrying trend of using counter-terror legislation to suppress and silence artistic freedom of expression.
Thank you, Gerd. Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us for this session. For those of you who are present here in this studio, and also those of you who follow us online. The title of this conversation is Silencing Artists as Terrorists, the Impact of Counterterrorism Legislation. What we would like actually to raise the question today here is how different governments use counterterrorism legislation, which is legitimate laws and legislations, to suppress artists' voices and to punish them for peaceful expressions and peaceful actions. I'm Jasmina Lazović, and I work as a research lead in a Denmark-based human rights organization which defends freedom of artistic expression and creativity. The mission of our organization is basically to report on patterns of violations of artistic freedom that we see all around the world, to fight against impunity for these violations of artistic freedom, and on top of that, to fight for the recognition or advocate for the recognition of artistic freedom as a separate niche within a broader scope of human rights, basic human rights, and fundamental freedoms. Together with me today for this discussion, we have Sudanese political cartoonist Khalid Albaih, who you have already actually chance to see him or listen to him this morning. He spoke a little bit about different issues, his connection with ICORN, but I would like actually to talk to Khalid about some other personalities he has, because to the best of my knowledge, aside from being a visual artist, he's also political cartoonist and also human rights activist. So Khalid, would you tell us something about yourself, something that you haven't shared already this morning, about the topics and issues that occupy you these years, and actually what is the content of your artistic work? In brief, of course, sorry. You're on mute.
Yeah, that should be the word of COVID era. You're on mute, you know. It's always the first of the conversation. I as I said, you know, I'm a political cartoonist. I started off as a political cartoonist. I do a lot of graphic work. And I also started writing op-eds and so on lately. Can you hear me?
Yes, it's perfect.
Okay. Yeah. So I do a lot of things. I'm also I started a couple of startups. As I said, I have a library that I'm working on in Sudan. I have a project called Get Fada. Fada in Arabic means space, and it's a platform for communities to donate spaces and facilities to their community. I'm also working on to give an artist fund for Sudanese artists in Sudan after the revolution now, where hopefully we're going to launch that soon. And I'm working on my third book. So a lot.
And once when your activist part of the day is done and you sit down to do your cartoons, what kind of issues and topics occupy you? On what kind of everyday things you react in your work?
As a political cartoonist that works online, I'm an independent political cartoonist. I don't work for a newspaper. I never have. I work on whatever that interests me, which I think is a great privilege, because you know I see what's going on in the news, and I try to talk about before I used to talk about whatever that's basically viral, what's happening right now. This is because it was kind of the element of that was more not pushed by algorithms or not pushed by being sponsored and so on. So it was a true kind of civilian journalism going on. But now, because most of these things have turned into being pushed by algorithms or being pushed by paid ads and so on. So I really try to figure out the best things that I could talk about in terms of situations that are not really highlighted or situations that are really highlighted. So I speak about things that a lot of people talk about, and then I try to pick niche things that are normally not on the spotlight.
Perfect. Let's talk more about that later. But before we really start our conversation with Khalid, I wanted to share a few things about Freemuse findings when it comes to the use of counterterrorism legislation for suppressing artistic freedom. I have to say that we constantly monitor tremendous number of violations of artistic freedom, which governments commit on the grounds of defending or protecting public moral, public security, public order. Governments also use arbitrarily legislation in order to protect national security, including terrorism legislation. But when it comes to international human rights law, it is really legitimate that governments can or should protect their citizens in the cases when their security is compromised and when they are under a threat. But also this international human rights law has been very explicit. What are the situations when governments can suppress freedom of expression? And this law is a little bit complicated, but it says that if governments want to suppress freedom of expression, it needs to be done in a way that they need to prove that it's necessary in a democratic society, and it's necessary to achieve an objective goal by employing the least restrictive rules. So this is the law, but maybe to translate this so we can all be on the same page what it actually means. So it means that if one wants to ban some artistic work, piece of art, they need to prove that that piece of art can be understood as a very direct incitement of violence or apology of terrorism. So you cannot just arbitrarily ban some content. It needs to fulfill certain criteria and really to be justifiable by the law. But despite these standards, which are very clear, we see that authorities in various countries really use them arbitrarily, and they use them to punish artists, particularly artists who criticize the authorities, either through their artistic work or their public performances, their social media posts, or their activism. And Freemuse, in the years between 2018 and 2020, documented and monitored more than 100 cases of artists who faced some legal consequences for their politically motivated work, which authorities deemed as insight of terrorism. To give you a couple of examples, what we've seen, like only in 2020, we documented that at least 25 artists in Turkey faced some legal consequences on charges that were explained as spreading terrorism propaganda or for membership in a terrorist organization. We saw similar things happening in Egypt. Only in 2018, we saw 7 artists who were arrested in Egypt. They were, in some ways, or there were allegations that they were associated with Egyptian musician Rami Essam, who created the song Bala, which reflects on the achievements of Egyptian 2011 resolution. And we still have, they were arrested in 2018, but we still have artists who are in prison in Egypt on the counterterrorism charges. We saw...
And one of them died.
yeah, one of them died under really not
Yes.
clear circumstances in prison in a situation which
In jail, yeah.
yeah, Amnesty International said that it was really medical negligence in his case, but yeah, that's a very important component. We also saw in Spain that we had 14 Catalan rappers who were sentenced to prison terms because of their rap songs that were deemed critical of the authorities. And finally, like I can also give example, this year in Russia we saw artist who has been in prison because of Facebook post which was deemed as justification of terrorism, and he literally criticized authorities because of some terrorist attack on the Federal Security Services in 2018. So we see that different circumstances bring artists in really vulnerable positions. And I would like now to turn to you, Khalid, because we know that a lot of these artists who are prosecuted on counterterrorism legislation are either in jail or in exile. And quite some of them are really bold enough, and they continue producing their artistic work regardless of the consequences which they might face. But some of them stay really are forced to self-censor and stay out of the radar of the authorities. So your political cartoons are quite bold, and you continue producing them even though and you are not in prison, so but it doesn't mean that you didn't have any problems with the authorities in different countries. So my first question for you would be if you can tell us if you face any problems by the authorities. So I really mean by governmental bodies in any of the countries where you worked or where your work was available.
Yeah, I mean, I work on the internet, as I said, so it's across the board. You know, so what happened is that I was detained in two countries, in the airport going into both of them actually going into the two countries, and one of them I was detained for a little bit less than 24 hours, I think, or something like that, and the other I was let out, but in the condition that I don't engage in any political anything. So it wasn't a nice experience, definitely. And then, of course, in Sudan, I wasn't jailed, but of course, I had a lot of threats from government-affiliated individuals and just people on the internet, and it came quite close actually to being very sticky situations, but thankfully, because of things that happened at the time, it was okay.
But do you think that you were stopped at this airport, as you mentioned, and kept in the detention? What was the reason? That is it your profile as a political cartoonist? I don't want to go into details, but do you think that you were targeted because of your artistic work?
Yeah, that's they. I remember in the airport in Egypt. Actually, it was the first question was like, "Are you gonna draw?" I was like, "I'm not gonna draw if you don't want me to draw." And it was very straightforward question. The people you were meeting, all of that, and they were trying to deport me at the same time. So yeah, it was definitely because of my drawing, and yeah.
Freemuse see a lot of these situations where actually there are travel restrictions, not because of some criminal or offenses or whatever else, but purely because of your artistic work, and that artists are being stopped and restricted. So this is one element.
I wrote an article. I wrote like a funny article about it. It's called "Welcome to Cairo." Welcome to Egypt, and it kind of explains the step by step of what happened, which was it was hilarious. But I really after it happened, but during it was quite worryingful actually, and it really made me think about how people are living in this situation for such extended time periods and the treatment, because it was very dreadful, definitely.
Yeah, and to bring another question, to what extent artists need to self-censor and really avoid addressing some issues in order to avoid situations in which you were. But yeah, now we mentioned one aspect of the problem. So artists facing problems by the authorities, but authorities and state actors are not the only actors which can have impact artistic works. So would you tell us something about your experience with generally people reacting on your work? No, I don't mean authorities, because as we've already mentioned, your cartoons are really quite a bold criticism of the different dynamics in the MENA region. How do people in general react on non-state actors, put in that way, to your work?
I mean, that's the thing with the internet is that it gives you that instant glorification, and it gives you that instant conversation about the work, and people start talking to each other and all of that. But as the internet kind of developed and the governments got a hold of what they need to do with the bullying online, and actually, the Sudanese government at a certain point had a division called the Electronic Mujahideen, so they were actually there just for you, so you don't know who's real and who's not, but mostly they disguise as real. Of course, they have their own accounts and all of that. But this is their job. And of course, there are people that are indulge in some sort of ideology that they think that this is the best way to deal with the situation, So it's just the constant bullying, and of course the hacking attempts, and it's continuous. It really is, and it's not really from one country or from when you speak, because you always, like as I said, because I work on social media. It's always about, if I do a cartoon about Egypt, the Egyptians are like, what do you know about Egypt? Go do things about Sudan, your countries, whatever. I do things about, in America, about whatever's going on in America. They're like, why are you doing things about America? Go do, you don't understand the situation, and so on. So it's a lot of people think about their situation is special. We only know what's going on. But human rights is human rights, and this is what I'm trying to say, and I'm trying to ask questions in my work. But it's constant, definitely.
In my first question, I said that you are the lucky one because you haven't been behind bars at this moment, and nor faced any kind of physical attacks. But can we say that for the artists who are not behind the bars, that they are lucky ones if you need to experience on a daily basis to receive such comments by people? Do you need to be hurt in order to be considered as someone who faces consequences for your work?
We're definitely the lucky ones, definitely. After the treatment that I've just seen a glimpse of, and I'm friends with a lot of journalists that have been detained for longer periods, sometimes up to four years and 3 years and so on, and it's absolutely a disgrace to humanity what happens inside. We're very lucky that we're outside. Absolutely, we're facing a different sort of threat, which is, we're not behind bars, but we're mentally behind bars. We're trying to keep ourselves outside. We're, maneuvering around things, dancing around the issues, and also always looking at, what can happen, what would happen. So the uncertainty is really a huge part of self-censorship. It's like, you don't know. I mean, when you started talking about laws and this is how the governments will, can prosecute you and so on. And in a lot of these governments, they don't need to. They don't need to have a law. And people disappear. People get disappeared for a really long time for absolutely nothing. And that happens from America to Sudan, where I'm from. It's to anywhere, really. People just disappear. You don't know what's happening, and it's a terrorist cause. And it's like, look at Guantanamo. Like, people have been there for 20 years now. Nothing happens. So it's really about that. It's really about the uncertainty. It's really about watching your back all the time. You don't know what's happening. You have no idea. The laws are not implemented even.
But can I ask you, why do you think that governments are actually have such a strong urge to kind of punish and silence artists who are really critical of what they do? Because the whole idea of international human rights law was that there was some kind of international, more or less, consensus that freedom of artistic expression should be guaranteed as a separate law, as a separate right, and that duty barriers in international human rights laws are governments. So governments are supposed to guarantee that we all have a freedom of expression, but on the other hand, what Freemuse see in our when we document violations of freedom of artistic expression, governments are the biggest violators of freedom of expression. So why do you think that they have? What is the role of art in our societies, which governments have a need to suppress and put under the carpet?
As a political cartoonist, especially in our region here, a big thing is the great leader or the king or the whoever is always how he manages to stay in power is by getting people scared. And if you make people laugh at him, that means people are not scared of him anymore, and that's dangerous. So the whole point is to make an example out of you, right? That it doesn't matter if there is a law. It doesn't matter if the world is watching. It doesn't matter. I can do whatever I want. And it's all about a certain period of time, because if you disappear, if I put you in jail, it doesn't matter how many hashtags go out. It doesn't matter how many organizations ask for these prisoners to be released. At the end of the day, it's geopolitics, and you're going to be made an example of.
Exactly.
And until this person or the president or the king, whatever, decides that already made an example of, because people have forgotten about you, and you live in a viral age, so everything goes viral, and everything a minute later is something. So trying to figure out what's the true information. Is this true? What's happening? And keeping the people's attention in one cause. The government realized that they can control that by controlling the internet, because that's the source of news that most people have. So if I control the internet, if I control what goes viral, I control their attention and what they see. And that's exactly what's happening. And you saw that now with what the Israelis did in Sheikh Jarrah, Palestine, right? It's the first meeting that the Israeli head of defense had after this, videos going viral with Quds brother and sister putting out videos and talking, and everybody watching these things, is that they met with the heads of Instagram and Facebook, because they wanted to stop that. So it's really about, these leaders know that if we keep you out of the attention of the public, you're gone, you're disappeared. How are people going to know about you?
Can I ask one very quick question, because we are now running out of the time? Just as a fellow artist who really, as we said, is lucky one and can continue more or less freely with certain level of self-censorship to work on your issues, what can we do to support those artists who are in really vulnerable situations, who are really at risk? I mean, you as a fellow artist, me as a person coming from an organization with defense artistic freedoms, now having in my situation in Afghanistan and how vulnerable artists are, would you have some message how we can be of help for those that are at risk?
Yes, of course. I mean, it's always that you're working, you're not at risk. That's the first thing that comes to mind. So you look good, you're working, you're fine. But it's the organizations that are specialized in supporting artists, supposedly, they need to understand the complications that come with that situation. They need to locate, they need to realize, they need to speak to the artists in secure ways about how we can support you. Because a lot of times, I personally, I'm giving interviews and I don't know, I don't know who's listening in. I don't know what's happening. Should I say what I really want to say? I shouldn't. It's about really understanding the situation, the geopolitical situation, understanding where the artist is situated, and what is the most secure way to speak to this person and support his work, right?
Okay, Khalid, you raised some of very important topics now. Something that Freemuse constantly see in our research, it is that artists are not necessarily only at risk because of the content of their art. They are also at risk because of their political activism, once when they go out on the street and participate in protests. In Turkey, if they join the rally, which is advocating for the Kurdish cause, so we see that they are also that their artistic work is not necessarily what put them in the risk. It is also when they speak in the conferences, when they post a social media comment and things like that. Khalid, I would really like to thank you for agreeing to participate in this conversation today, for sharing your story, to putting yourself at potential, hopefully, let's keep our fingers crossed, not risk for you. And for Freemuse, these are the reasons why we really believe that artistic freedom should be recognized as a separate issue, that artists at risk should be recognized as a separate group, especially in crisis situations, because we know that quite often that primary target groups are journalists, human rights defenders, other vulnerable groups, but we really believe that in this world that is really under constant crisis and upheavals, that artistic freedom should be recognized as separate, and artists should be really given a special status and treated as those who might be in risk because of their work. Thank you very much for following this discussion, and I will now give a floor to my colleague Gert.
Thank you very much, Khalid Albaih, for presenting your situation and reminding us all of some of the repercussions that are sometimes part of these dialogues that we hold safely here in Gothenburg today. Thank you very much, Jasmina Lazović, for holding the conversation based on many years of working in this field. Stay tuned. In 10 minutes' time, we have another conversation with a cooperation between Freemuse and ICORN on the issue of erasure of LGBTI artistic expressions. So stay tuned here in the Freedom of Expression studio at the Gothenburg Book Fair.